Hello there, and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Meyers. We're here every week, meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And, well, this is a topical issue year after year after year. I mean, I can't remember a time in my lifetime where we've said, don't worry about that, or nobody's talking about that. It's always in the news.
Yes, this is a topic called the national debt that we could do a show on once a year and just keep one script.
Yeah, I think we had Alexander Hamilton on our first show, if I recall.
Yeah, he wasn't very good either. He kept going to sleep. Yeah, we've got Travis Roach joining us again, an economist at the University of Central Oklahoma and head of the business school, head of the economics department, pardon me. And he's going to talk about, give us a primer on the national debt. What kind of reports are we getting that we ought to worry about, and what can we just kind of shrug our shoulders about?
Yeah, everything you need to know about the national debt.
Yep.
Today, Dr. Travis Roach on The Verdict.
Right now, 6 feet can feel like a long ways away. But from 6 feet, we can still smile at each other. From our doorways and our stairways, from opposite sides of the street and opposite sides of the country. Through fear and frustrations, we can remind each other that we are still here for each other. Because we can still smile at each other. And we're not going anywhere.
Military service ran in my blood, starting from my father, which joined the Navy. On the Chickasaw side, my uncle, which served in the United States Army. I'm Benjamin Espinosa, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, and I'm Chickasaw. I went to the Secretary of Defense's staff at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., which ultimately led to becoming a combat support technician for Naval Special Warfare, specifically SEAL Team 10. I think to be proud and to love your tribe, to love being Chickasaw, you also have to love being American. You also have to love everything that America stands for. Equality, perseverance, professionalism, and power. I want my family to know that their father is a good person, but also feels that he has an obligation to the country and to love this nation. Anything worth having is worth dying for. The military and the country owes me nothing. I owe it everything.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
As we talked about, we're really pleased to welcome back Travis Roach from University of Central Oklahoma. Travis did his undergraduate work at North Texas University, got his PhD in economics at Texas Tech. We were lucky enough to get him here back in Oklahoma at UCO, where he now serves as the chairperson of the Department of Economics. We have already had Travis on a number of times. This is his fifth appearance. He has authored many scholarly articles and gives lectures all the time on economic topics. And when Mick and I talked and thought we'd like to do a show on the national debt, whom better to do it than Travis? So Travis, thank you for heeding our call, and good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks for having me here. This is a big topic, and like you said, we talk about it just about every year. So hopefully we can make an evergreen episode that we just put on next time this comes out.
Okay. I assume, and if you take Economics 101, I'll call it, there's got to be some discussion of the national debt, and when you explain what it is.
Yeah, so I consider it more of a macroeconomic topic, obviously. But we do have to explain it because in the United States, we do it a little bit different than most other countries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so just let's get out some myths right now, kind of the discussion about it, have like some good base facts that we can all share and agree upon about what the national debt is. The national debt is how much the government has incurred to spend to pursue the policies that Congress has passed. So, for instance, if Congress decides that we'd like to buy 100 new F-22s, 100 new tanks, and spend this much on Social Security, they pass a bill, and they pass that on to the executive branch to execute. Well, the executive branch has to borrow that money to be able to do Congress's plan. When they run into this debt limit, this debt ceiling that we've created, they have to come back to Congress to ask for the authority to spend the money that they've already allocated. Now, the reason why we have this is because we used to, on an item-by-item basis, go in and have to issue new government bonds with new debt every time we financed a purchase. So prior to World War I, if we wanted to build a bridge, if we wanted to buy a tank, we had to set a government bond, find an interest rate, pick a length of time, and then start that process all over again, any new debt that was incurred. Well, World War I hits, and well, let's save a little bit of time. You don't have to come ask every single little item. Here's just a limit that I don't want you to cross. That's how much you're allowed to borrow. And that's when our modern debt ceiling came to be. And we've kept that for the last, 100 years.
Well, even as far back as when the country was founded, I mean, they were already, discussing a national debt and how that could be handled. And so how did they have debt prior to that authorization?
Well, the very boring answer is what I'm about to give you. If you want the fun and interesting answer, I strongly recommend going and listening to the musical Hamilton. I listened to it on my ride to work here today just to get me hyped up for the show. So we fought a Revolutionary War, and you had a lot of states that were in massive debt after this. And the government, the central government at the time, had a very real decision as to whether or not to just absolve this debt and say sorry and move about their day, or to replenish the coffers of these states, all these farmers, regular people who loaned to their state, to their government, to try and fight a Revolutionary War. They were in debt. And Alexander Hamilton at the time made the argument that by being good on this debt, we can put faith and credit in our economy. That's the one hand. And on the other hand, we also can have a flow of funds from outside countries into our country, and that would set up the basis of what we know now as international trade. So we get a system in which the way for your country to have credit is to have some debt. And so Alexander Hamilton pushed this policy. This was probably what he lived and died on, really. And his adversary at the time was Thomas Jefferson. And it's funny, you could listen to some of the speeches that they said and gave during this time, and it sounds like it came from 2019. It could be any political convention happening now is this, well, you've created a larger central government. This is to the detriment of states. And Hamilton's response was, sure, but also helps grow our economy, and a rising tide lifts all boats, so the states will be helped by this. But this is one of those perennial issues that we talk about year after year after year.
Now, is the debt limit defined by a particular formula, or is it just a dollar number?
It's a dollar number, which is part of the reason why we keep hitting it. So the most recent that we increased it, if I remember right, it was to about $31 trillion, which, yes, is a lot of money. That's trillion with a T. It was raised by $2.5 trillion to get it there. Prior to that, it had been raised, I think, since back to World War I, about 74 times. During the Trump administration, we raised it 3 times. And I think in Biden's so far, it's been 2. Now, it's a dollar amount, which makes it not inflation-proof. So suppose we're replacing tanks with tanks. If you built a tank in 1990, it's going to cost more to build that same tank here in 2020. That means that that dollar amount on the debt ceiling also would grow. So even if we're replacing one for one, we're spending more now than we did back then. And so it's just not able to keep up with modern spending prices and amounts.
Well, what Congress sets the debt limit, is that done by legislation?
It's done by legislation. It's done by a party policy. So House has to agree on a number, Senate has to agree on a number, they have to send this off for signature. Now, where we're going to come into it and why this has been a big topic of discussion lately is Kevin McCarthy's the new Speaker of the House. He made it a precondition of his job. This is how he got the gig to negotiate on this debt limit, to pursue spending cuts. So they could today, if they decided, pass a debt ceiling bill, a clean one that had nothing else attached to it, and it probably would pass. But Speaker McCarthy will never bring that to the floor because that would cause problems among his caucus with people who put him in the speakership. That would kind of be the first domino for him in potentially losing his speakership.
Seems like the defense budget and Social Security, the entitlement spendings, are really the two almost immovable forces that Congress is dealing with. Am I missing something else? Or?
I mean, it makes up just such a massive portion of the debt. If we looked at a pie chart, it's well over half. And so if we're thinking about if we do want to cut our spending, if that's how we're going to reduce our debt, it has to come from one of those major three categories. Anything else has probably already been cut to its core. It's already been moved to its minimum efficient scale. And so if we are going to attack this problem by limiting spending, we're going to have to pull from one of those major buckets.
Does the handling of the setting of the debt limit, the procedure of it, does it change from other legislation? In other words, it starts in the House, does it not?
I wish I were a political scientist and could tell you an honest answer on that. I'm 99% sure you're right, but
That's close enough for me.
Thank you, good.
Well, let's just say it starts in the House. They pass a bill that it says the debt limit is. It goes then to the Senate, which has to pass it. Are there any supermajorities in either House or Senate required to get it passed?
Not to my knowledge. I believe it can be a simple majority, which is why at this point, I think it's a 5 vote threshold in the House that would put it over. Right now they're in the majority, but to even bring a bill to be talked about, you need to be in the majority. You need to have the speakership to bring that to the floor to vote, and that's not happening right now.
How is the interest rate determined?
That's a great question, and that's one of those, the looming issue with not raising the debt limit. Like if we didn't do this, the outcome is either incredibly bad or severe. So there's no good version of not raising the debt limit. And one of the ironic unintended consequences of this is, say we didn't raise the debt limit and the United States went bad on its debt for the first time in our history, all of our government debt would now be at a higher interest rate. So our existing debt would suddenly balloon because we have a higher interest rate because we just reneged on our debt. It'd be like missing a credit card payment. All of a sudden, your credit interest rate will go up. And so by threatening with this debt limit, and if we did happen to go past it and not be able to pay our bond owners, that interest rate would go up.
Well, let's talk about the consequences when we get back. We're going to take a break. You're watching The Verdict. Dr. Travis Roach is our guest, and we're discussing the national debt and its implications. We'll be right back.
At Whitten Burridge, we're litigators. That's all we do. All of our clients, some sort of wrong has occurred to them. We try to right that wrong. Corporate America, they have all the power. It's sort of like going against an army. I like helping the underdog. That's what gets me up out of bed every day.
Our success rate is phenomenal, but that's not all they get. We care about people.
I'm very proud of what we've been able to do for our clients, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to do in the future. There's still a lot of wrongs that need to be righted.
The Vet Hero office at the University of Central Oklahoma, it is a one-stop shop for veterans when they're trying to get their education.
I call it my encore job. I get to take care of veterans. We help them transition. I was that guy that transitioned after 24 years, and in the end, GI Bill is a benefit that those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine earned. It was the thing that made us the greatest country in the world coming out of World War II, and it will continue to do the same thing for this future generation of service members.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We are talking with Dr. Travis Roach on the national debt. Ken?
Travis, before the break, you mentioned that defaulting on the national debt could have 2 consequences, both bad. Can you distinguish between the 2? the two consequences?
Hopefully. It's a little bit like we're walking blind. We just literally have not done this before. We have never hit the debt limit and not been able to pay our bond owners. The first immediate consequence of this is that interest rates increase, but then we also lose our position in the world economy that people believe that government debt, U.S. government debt, is essentially a risk-free asset. You have folks who, we are the benchmark that they are measured against, that if nothing else, if you want money to stay money and more or less stay inflation protected, invest into U.S. bonds and securities. This helps us finance government spending, and we can have a larger government and have a bigger, broader base of benefits for our constituents because we're able to borrow at such a low interest rate compared to literally any other country. That starts to go away. Now, to the extent that we can get people on our side and have them think that, yes, don't worry, we didn't pay our debt that one time, but that's the first and last time, don't worry. Maybe there's a world in which that exists. I don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. And then we start thinking about some of the negative ramifications of hitting that debt limit is federal entities start to shut down. You have people who receive paychecks that won't receive their paychecks. So right around the time I was graduating college, going to graduate school, was the last time we flirted with this. And 2011 era, you had national parks that shut down. You had people who were without paychecks for an entire month. And we think about, somewhere like Tinker Air Force Base, or I live downtown, we have the federal building there. There are a lot of jobs that suddenly, if you're without an income, you're not spending in your local economy. So here in Oklahoma, very far away from Washington, D.C., we see money dry up. We see local people who go out and buy lunch and see movies, and that money circulates throughout an economy. That starts to go. And even the threat of that will start to harm an economy because if you're planning on not having a paycheck, you might cut back your spending a little early. And so it could be the first domino of a very long contagion that would be really rough on our economy.
Well, in 2011, we didn't have a default on the national debt, did we?
We didn't officially default on it, but we came close enough that so right now, we've actually officially passed the debt ceiling.
Yeah.
But Janet Yellen and all of her other colleagues over at Treasury are doing kind of these extenuating circumstance, some accounting tricks basically to keep people paid. They're choosing priorities now. Like we're trying to still fund veterans benefits, but this is as we get closer and closer and closer to an absolute sunset date where we cannot pay our bills, that gets harder and harder to do.
You mentioned during the break that you're teaching a course on game theory, and I suspect you're going to discuss what Congress might do and what's in the best interest of the House and the Senate, and the Republicans and the Democrats. Go through that for me.
Yeah, so honestly, game theory is one of the more fun classes that I get to teach. I teach it with my MBA students every summer, and this is the first time I've got to teach it with my undergraduate students. And as the name suggests, we're modeling economic decision making like a game, as if I was playing Risk or some other board game. And so my decision making has to take into account your decision making, but your decision making takes into account my decision making, which thinks of yours. And so it gets very tricky very fast, but we can really simplify some of these games. And so the one that honestly always comes up when we're talking about debt ceiling negotiations or even labor contracts, for instance, in the MLB with their players union, is this game of chicken where it's in neither side's interest for the economy to crash, for us to run into each other. One person's gonna swerve. And so game theory would predict that we will negotiate on this debt ceiling. We won't hit the debt ceiling and crash the economy because that's good for neither Democrat nor Republican. Things don't always go as the games you'd expect. Mm-hmm. It has for the last 74 years, so I'm putting my faith and trust in that. But we have to think about what is in the rational self-interest of some of these policymakers. And I'm not convinced that some of our policymakers see the downside of reneging on the debt nearly as severely as they should.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think at the very last second we will come up with a very small patchwork debt ceiling increase, and we will have the same conversation next year. I'll go ahead and plan my drive to the studio so we can talk about this. Maybe let's oppose April 2024 if that works for y'all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Book it.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I guess the argument against raising the debt ceiling is that we've got to get our spending under control. And if we are spending too much money, maybe we need to cut back. And where can we cut back? That decision about where to cut back, does Congress make that, or is the market itself going to make it?
So that is part of the conversation, but we've been pushed into a corner here. There's also the other decision where we raise more taxes. We can keep current spending levels, which Congress has approved, and we can just fund the spending levels that we believe are good for this economy. So one way to do that is by hiring more IRS agents to make the taxes and the tax law that we already have on the books actually enforced. In a world in which people cheat on their taxes, say by 1%, 2%, 5%, we're not catching that right now. It is low-hanging fruit to go and enforce our current tax code and raise the taxes that would make this available. So the thing that comes to my mind, so my in-laws, they're very old school and they like to file their taxes on paper. Well, the IRS is having a tough time keeping up with just their demands because they've been understaffed for years now. And it took them 2 to 3 years to get their stimulus payment into their pocketbooks. This is because their paper was kind of moving around the Treasury and moving around that department. Well, they just got it about last month, and right at that same time, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a big, all-encompassing policy, mostly designed to try and cut carbon dioxide emissions and update our grid, it also put in new funding for new IRS agents. Well, now phone calls are actually finally being answered. You're starting to see old stimulus payments that hadn't been issued finally hitting the checkbooks of people who've been waiting on them for 2 to 3 years.
What do your students think about all of this? What comments do they make in class that we might find interesting?
That's such a good question. They're a little bit like what we're talking about here, is just kind of like, what the heck is this and why are we doing this? Like, it feels
That's
a little
like us,
bit,
Mick.
yeah, it feels a little bit like in soccer we would call this an own goal. We've scored on ourselves. This is this kind of torture that we put ourselves through each and every year as often as we hit a debt ceiling. Unless we don't. You know, it's one of those, we passed it 3 times under the Trump administration. Kevin Hearn, for instance, he's my new congressman because they just recently changed my district. He passed it without argument 3 times. Now, suddenly that there's a different party president in office, he would no longer like to pass it and he would like to see cuts to spending. These are the same spending and benefits and system that we had the last few times that he passed this. So it's political, and it really is just a question of why are we doing this to ourselves?
Mm-hmm. What do other countries do?
So most other countries, when they pass new spending, by implication, the assumption is that, well, you are authorized to borrow to fund this spending that we have authorized.
We just have 1 minute left, and I can't help but ask this question. If we should default, what impact would this have on countries around the world?
It might change where they're deciding to put their money when they have any surplus or deficit, what they choose to invest their money in. Right now, we're the backstop for most other countries. They might choose a new safe harbor for their currency. They might choose a new safe harbor for where they invest their own government money. I don't know what country they choose. This could be China. This could be a handful of the Nordic countries. It could be just kind of a diversity of these.
Interesting. Travis, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for
we
having me.
appreciate it, really.
Yeah. We'll be back with the final word after this.
This is the epidemic of my generation. This is my HIV. This is my Black Plague.
In the midst of one of our state's largest crises,
Oklahomans are dying from this preventable and treatable disease on a daily basis.
we believe there's hope.
That little pill will cause destruction through your whole life.
Watch the entire award-winning 9-part docuseries Killing Pain, made available by Fighting Addiction Through Education at killingpain.com.
It used to be okay in teachers' lounges. It used to be okay in maternity wards. It was okay in sporting arenas, college campuses, and office spaces. But now that we understand the deadly dangers of secondhand smoke, that's not okay anymore. So why is it okay that thousands of employees are exposed to it every day at work? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's protect hardworking Oklahomans. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict, a very stimulating half hour on the national debt. Nobody explains it better than Travis.
No, he really does do a good job with it, and it's a difficult topic, but all the publicity coming out of Washington made me think we ought to do a show about it, because I don't know what the national debt is, and I think I know a little bit more about it now.
Well, in this century, so 23 years now, we've had a number of crises.
Yeah.
I mean, the 2009, fallout, and the real estate, and then this kind of annual discussion about the national debt. And as Barry Trammell said on our show last week, it always seems to work out. Things always seem to work out, but you always wonder. But it doesn't mean it always has to work out going forward. Some website information: uco.edu. You can get more information about Travis and his coworkers, and we have a website, theverdict.tv. We'll see you next week.